Hello, okay. Uh, Welcome. This is the very first episode of a thing that I am calling Getting to Know You. So joining me today is my friend Lip. Hello, Lip. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, spectacular. And just pretending that we didn't just spend the last hour trying to get the PlayStation Network to cooperate with us before we started this recording. Um, so, this is... Lip, you obviously you have a little bit of context for this, as you know we've been talking on DMs and Discord and stuff. But kind of to sort of rehash my own thoughts out there, to kind of put them all in one place, and as well as the for the benefit of anybody listening to this in the future, is this is sort of the kind of the first shot at this that I'm taking. I just want to take a second and kind of explain what we're doing here, what the thought process is behind this, where the idea for this Getting to Know You series came from. And it's a little bit of a combination for me of a couple of things. As of recording this, if you are a human in a bold new future listening to this a long time from now, we are right in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. We are both of us are living in the United States, where we've been currently on lockdown for it's got to be going on 2.5 months now.
Yeah, I think we're just about at the 3 mark in a day or two.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have found during that time is I've been increasingly spending more time kind of thinking about my interpersonal relationships. I guess they say distance makes the heart grow fonder. I've been thinking about all of my my friends and kind of the people that I know, and the sort of the isolation that I think a lot of us are feeling, and it kind of spurred this desire in me to maybe start taking the opportunity to not take my my friendships or my acquaintances as much for granted, and spend more time really talking to people, and kind of learning their story, getting to know them, and digging deeper in a way that maybe I wouldn't have before. So I kind of started with that premise of the idea of, that'd be an interesting thing to do, and it led me to kind of think about how, especially in sort of the current social and political climate in the world and in this country, the idea of just sitting down and having a conversation with somebody, with anybody, who has led a different life from you, had different life experiences from you, or some of the same life experiences from you, and just talking about those. That's something in my life I've always found was incredibly enriching, and that's why I decided I wanted to do this as a thing that I would be recording, rather than just going and doing it and having conversations with folks, because I thought, well, maybe there's some benefits, and maybe some good energy, some good vibes can be put into the world if I record these conversations I have with friends. So I'm kind of modeling this whole little series that I'm trying to make off after the idea of sitting down with a friend and playing a video game and just talking. So that is what we're doing here, and Lip, I reached out to you. I reached out to a few people to see, if they'd be willing to sit down with me. You obviously said that you would, and just the way scheduling worked out, you're the first person that I'm going to be sitting down with. And
just like it's pretty vital to have this kind of opportunity to talk about these things. One of the things I was telling you earlier is that I have a history with this. Kind of creating spaces where folks can just talk, create an open forum about different issues, and having something like a game to kind of like sit in between to kind of like kind of lessen the blow of some of the harder things that we may talk about, just kind of break things up a bit. It is very important now to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's at least for me, and I'm sure people who are much more well versed in psychology and social, interaction and things like that, probably know that there's, I'm sure there's like a name for this or whatever, but I've always found that just the idea of having, a kind of a shared activity that is separate from the conversation makes talking a lot easier. I think it's one of the, at least for me, it's one of the big reasons I love D&D so much, is that it's sort of like an activity-based, social engagement. And that's sort of kind of where our initial link is through the, the proficiency bonus D&D group. So before we really start getting into the meat of this, to sort of explain the what everybody has been looking at this point is, at least for me, is the Streets of Rage home screen. So we're playing on PlayStation 4. Lip, you recommended PlayStation and the this game in particular. I know. I don't know if it's coming through the noise filter on my recording software, but at least through Discord, I'm definitely hearing this sort of like the taps. Sounds like you're in the game. I'm still sitting on the home screen. We are.
Oh, I'm just kind of going back and forth on these characters. The character art is one of my favorites.
Is there more than just the 4? Because I only have the 4 unlocked.
Yeah, you unlocked. You can unlock quite a bit. I haven't gotten to the one past the first kind of square you can see there.
Oh yeah, I see.
Blue halo, but then apparently this whole black bar gets filled up with characters.
Oh wow. So to explain what is going to be on the screen here during our conversation, it is unfortunately just going to be we're both playing Streets of Rage, but we're being forced to play Streets of Rage just simultaneously rather than together. PlayStation Network has decided that it doesn't like us today. So we spent about an hour trying to get it to work, and then we decided, to hell with it. Let's just play the same game at the same time and chat while we do it. So that's what we're going to be doing during today's conversation. So I'm on the character select. I see I have the choice of Axel, Blaze, whose outfit seems not super conductive to street brawling.
Not at all.
Cherry, and Floyd, who has robot arms.
What I will say is, one of the tricks of this game, just before you start, they never tell you, but there are minor kind of character attributes that they don't tell you which one's which. I do know that Floyd moves a bit slower, but his hits take more health from the enemy. Cherry's a faster hitter, but it's weaker, and she's more agile, and she gets some jump abilities.
Okay.
Blaze does fire damage. I think the idea is that Blaze and Axel are supposed to be the two all well-rounded characters. They're pretty much good at everything. But I know that Blaze is a little bit more her reach for attacks are a little bit further, whereas Axel, he does more. I can't explain Axel. He just seems like he's a good kind of I think they set him up for being a Mario type person. You can't go wrong.
He does seem to be the generic human man, default white guy protagonist. Who are you gonna play? Because I'll play a different character than who you play. Not that it matters, but
I usually go. This is just something for me in most games. I usually go for the Cherry type. I'm much more agile. I take the rogue. I take the monk. I'm going to hit fast, and I'm going to run away. I'm going to find defensive measures. I'm going to play a very kind of fast and loose game. So I usually go with Cherry.
Cherry is your pick. That's actually that was Cherry was calling to me. Not that I played any of this game, but she looks like she's spunky. So I like that.
Say but if you like Cherry, then Blaze may be close to your type, if that's your type of person. It seems like the two of them are most similar.
At that recommendation, I will play Blaze. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to ignore whatever cutscene and stuff is going on here. Just talk over that as we'll kind of launch into our conversation. So I think one of the things we had just gotten close to hitting on that I wanted to explain what we were doing before we like got launched into it, because I think once we do start talking about this, I think we're going to be kind of like off to the races here. So since this is like an audio, an audio only format, I think we had said when we were kind of doing our setup that the timing of just the way that this has worked out is sort of serendipitous, I guess. In that you and I had been talking about figuring out a recording time to start this, and this whole idea of this was going to be something where I was really interested in talking to people who had unique and different life experiences from me, and between kind of the time where we had originally discussed setting up and doing this, and when we're actually now sitting down to do it, absolutely like heartbreaking and just crazy things are happening kind of currently in this country. So again, at the time of recording, in addition to being in the midst of the coronavirus, we're about a full week now into a pretty massive
global I would just say essentially it's a riot, it's a cry, it's a little cry for change.
I was gonna the word I'm getting stuck on here is I keep wanting to say like resurgence. I don't know if that's the right word, but almost this massive new wave of like almost this like a new civil rights movement is almost what it seems to be. So since obviously this is an audio format, I am a generic white starter character man, and you are a person of color. You're black.
Yes. Black and queer identified too, for the purposes of like what is going on, because I think
sure
when we talk about more details, there's more than just race that's hitting at the point of this, which I think why it's so powerful now.
Right.
But there's a lot more to be said in the midst of what's happening in the times. But yeah, holding a couple of identities is something worth talking about.
Sure. So I think for me, one of the things that I've been, kind of listening to the stories people have to say, and kind of the cry of what is it as a white person, like what should I be doing right now? And what I keep hearing over and over and over again is like one of the important things to be doing is to be listening. Which is why I say I think it's very it's just crazy timing that we were kind of setting up to have this sort of a format of a conversation right at the time that we are. So it's certainly a heavy conversation to jump right into, and if you want to if there's somewhere else you feel better about starting, certainly we can, but sort of the first place that my mind goes in light of everything that's been happening over the past week or so is like, I guess just as a person of color in America, and you live in Chicago, is that correct?
Yes, I'm in Chicago, south side of Chicago as well. We've had just kind of talking to it, because I think it's the best to kind of just just jump to it. Chicago has been hit quite a bit. I don't know if I want to start off with that conversation, but it has been hit with more than just like the actual protest that's been happening here, and it's created some other unique dispositions within the city. But for the most part, I will say this: there's nothing new about all of this. There's really nothing new that's happening. I think when we talk about race issues, the country as a whole, and anybody who's listening and hearing these conversations that we're having today should know that like America has been kind of like a hotbed for what we have seen kind of boil up in this time. But then also having this moment that we're all kind of actively saying, this is real. We're actually noticing that there is a level of systematic oppression that happens in this country. Opens up a lot of doors for not only people to listen, like these conversations to be open, but also for folks who start saying, okay, I'm going to actively recognize this as a truth. Because you could easily hear the stories, you can easily have these conversations, and then at the end just say, well, I don't believe that's the case, which has been the case for a long time. People just say, well,
right.
I don't perceive it that way, so therefore, in my mind, this just doesn't exist. The idea that we've heard so many times in Chicago alone, people just say like, well, I don't see racism in Chicago. It's to this current atmosphere, it's kind of hard for you to just look at yourselves and just say, I don't see anything wrong with what's happening right now.
Right. Now, I guess to take a longer view, even in like the stuff going on, right now, or even, just in the last few months or couple of years. I mean, what is it for you? What is it like growing up, as a person of color in the, I don't know if you've always lived in Chicago, or if you've have relocated. What's it like? What is that experience like? There's so much you hear about just the differences that I think a lot of white people are like shocked to hear, I guess, that
I to give a little background, because I think I kind of started this off without giving a good understanding of me.
Sure.
So just a quick bio of who I am. I definitely was born and raised in Chicago. Mm-hmm. It is a city that I am very passionate about, very, very passionate about. A lot of the work that I do with social work, with theater, I've tried to do a lot of local D&D organizations and groups for education in Chicago, so that I can teach children, especially children of color, how to play a game like D&D and be a part of the narrative that they write with the coast. And that as well, one of the things I've learned about Chicago is that Chicago is better than a lot of other places, just generally in the world, when it comes to discussions about race, because it's a very liberal city. There's a lot more chance that you're going to find somebody that shares a much more progressive perspective that you have. But at the same time, the problem with Chicago is that it's the Midwest, so a lot of things that happens in the Midwest is that we are open, we're very sweet, we're very warm, we're very welcoming, but at the same time there's this cold shoulder that comes from the city, and so the opinions that we have are very like kept to yourself. I'm going to only kind of like be very reserved. I may not agree with you or agree with the decisions that you make, but I'm going to be nice about it and just not really say anything. And one of the things I loved about that in the city is that it opens the door for people to be more open to seeing somebody else's perspective. But at the same time, it allows for people to kind of in their head be like, this is my understanding of a race or a city or a type of person. And I get to keep that opinion without actually having this type of discourse. So I've spent a lot of my life kind of opening the doors to say, let's have those hard conversations. Let's talk about those things, because at the end of the day, maybe your understanding of something is not as difficult, or it's not as far-fetched as I may think, but we'll never know until we have that conversation and see where things meet in the middle. So one of the things that happens in Chicago is that a lot of people kind of assume, well, when I think about the South Side of Chicago, I think about like a very hard-pressed, like dangerous city, a place where there's a lot of violence in this particular area. The South Side of Chicago is where stereotypically a lot of black individuals are from, so that's where a lot of violence has to happen. And just to kind of redirect that narrative, um, Southside Chicago is historical in a lot of ways. It's one of the ending places for the Underground Railroad. It was the one last stop that people made when they were actually understanding that this is a place where I can consider myself to be free.
Wow.
And Abraham Lincoln being a one of the huge proponents in Illinois to have Springfield be another kind of resting spot for it. It ended up being kind of like a north point where politics and liberal beliefs kind of like ran free. Of course, you had like New York, you had DC, that also had a very open and progressive idea as well. But really, when you were in Chicago, kind of making sure I'm fair in saying this, Chicago is also a city of gangsters. There's no doubt about it. Home of Al Capone. So we know that a city that's filled with gangsters, they're going to naturally be more open to whatever type of person you are, because how can I judge who you are if I myself am not like 100% decent of an individual?
Right.
So it was a lot more. There is again a lot more open opportunities for conversations. But again, I'm still going to live my life. You live yours, and we won't really talk about where that problem lies between us.
And you think that's sorry to I don't want to cut off, but do you think that is kind of a point you keep hitting on? Is this this idea of not necessarily I guess a lot of the stuff that I've been listening to in the news or hearing or whatever, you wouldn't think as much like this kind of live and let live attitude would be something that is like as big a component when you start talking about like race issues or socioeconomic issues. There's the media and everything else, highlights much more of this sort of almost direct confrontational, like I am, against your lifestyle or against who you are as a person or anything like that. But, it seems like you're saying a lot of the maybe hindrance to progress is kind of lies in that unwillingness to like have a conversation or maybe the thought that like, well, as long as I don't I don't have a problem with this person or whatever, but like we don't need to talk about that. We don't need to have a discourse. I guess there's I don't know. There's something to be said for that, I suppose. Of like,
absolutely. I think so. One of the things that that has always, it's something that I never really quite understood myself about Chicago, but it just works. Anybody who's been to Chicago, I don't know if you, Matt, have ever been to Chicago yourself.
No, I don't believe so.
Chicago, if you spend a day in Chicago, you realize that there is a section for everybody. So we have everything from Korean Village to Jewtown to Chinatown to Boys Town, which is predominantly white identified homosexuals. You have Hyde Park, which is a historically black neighborhood. You have Uptown, which is honestly, for a long time, it was like a big melting pot of different foreign identities, such as like Persian individuals, African individuals, just kind of like all creating this melting pot of like immigrant city. And so in that way, it worked because everybody had their own town. But the thing is that if I'm centering myself around people who I know and I am having conversations with very, very like-minded individuals, my understanding and my opinion of the world and my lens of the world is going to be within that town. So people who grew up, one of the things that I to this day think is very, very phenomenal, and definitely I won't speak on details of it. This is only my perception of what I've seen in the city. But in Chinatown, I being from Chicago as long as I have not seen criminal activity. I have not seen any sort of commerce news. When I watch the television, if I'm hearing about something that's happening in Chinatown, 9 times out of 10, it was already handled and it was all civil amongst that town. Um, my perception of it was that most neighborhoods have their own ways of going about their policies. They have their own way of kind of like navigating their neighborhood because they know their people in their neighborhood. And for many of these places, because they are identified by countries not in America, maybe their customs and their norms are different. And so something that a typical neighborhood, like a suburban neighborhood, would just say, I'll just let the police handle. Maybe this neighborhood says, we're going to step up and we're going to have our own sense of community kind of step in and hold accountability for each other. And that's happened a lot in the different neighborhoods in Chicago. But I think in that same token, this discourse this type of discourse that we're having, it only matters to me. And I noticed this when I started going to New Orleans and Dallas, Texas, and hitting more of the southern states. Discourse only really matters in my eyes when you're having it with people who you aren't necessarily always going to just agree with everything that you say. Because if you understand the same things that I understand, and you and I are 100% on the same page about everything, then where's the necessity for us to find that change that needs to happen? Mm-hmm. A lot of the conversations that become a problem are the ones where someone I can talk to says, yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. I completely 100% behind you. I have no qualms about what you're saying. But then this person leaves and they go to a different group of individuals that they also identify with. And they say with those folks, well, this is how I feel about this. This is how I feel about that. I think about that when I think about when we talk about intersections, we talk about people who hold different kind of hats. And I think you can have somebody who is who straddles different identities. So they are African American and queer identified, but the African American individual can go into the community and kind of have this kind of oppressive perspective of the LGBTQ community, or just have their own understanding about what trans identification means. And to some people, it's like, well, yeah, no, that's not a thing. They just don't know how to identify themselves. But then when they go into queer communities, they know that that opinion is not the same. That opinion would change. So then therefore that person goes to the community and they just kind of agree, yes, I think that trans rights are valid. And I think that everything that you all are saying about trans identity is something I accept with. That discourse is important because that person who straddles a yes between the African American community and the queer community, and they have these little details that need to be talked about, that need to be focused on, it never gets talked about if you're just constantly with people who you can just say, yeah, I hold this identity, so I agree with you, and it's fine. We don't get to the core of the issue that there is, in that particular situation, there is a problem between the African American community, the trans community, and the queer community. A white male homosexual is going to hold different privileges and different opinions about trans rights and trans identity, and African Americans, just statistically throughout a very long point in history, have always kind of seen queer rights and trans rights as this secondary thing that doesn't necessarily have to be put in the forefront of our minds, but it is. Same thing with us having the conversation now. There's women's rights that easily gets talked over, gets put on the back burner when we talk about bigger rights. When we talk about the situation that, like right now, George Floyd is a name that everyone is talking about in their houses, but we don't talk about the African American women who were killed in the same vein, in the same way. we had a moment where we talked about Sandra Bland for like a split second, but think about all the ramifications that happened with her death that affects an entire different type of community that is just kind of housed into the African American community because Black women are a part of the Black community, but they also need that forum. They also need that place to talk about that. And when you straddle those kind of identities, you kind of just say, yeah, okay, I'll go with what the masses say, but what I have to say is also important.
So that's a super interesting like concept to think about, is like the idea of, you know, people that do straddle these lines of you know, groups that, you know, they each, you know, in a way they have like isolated needs, but in you know, another way they have, you know, they have places where these, you know, these needs overlap and where these needs are the same, but they're almost compartmentalized because of these sort of different groupings that people are put into. I guess like people of color, men versus women, you know, trans rights, things like that. And so I guess is it the type of thing where we say like, I don't know, I guess to you, like, where is the, like, what is the way to approach that? What is the way to deal with that? Because you don't want to, you know, you don't want to say, I think it's a short step between like, oh well, let's not look at you know, let's not look at the differences in these groups when we're talking about their, you know, the struggles that they might have, or the things that they need to, you know, to achieve in you know, getting rights where maybe they don't have them. I think it's a short step from like, let's not put people into boxes, to like, all lives matter.
Yeah,
you know, where you get like kind of you've lost sight of the uniqueness that, you know, is so crucial when talking about some of these issues. I guess where's the balance there? Where's the line? How do you talk about all of these things for, you know, for different people without, you know, I guess drowning out, marginalizing one side, or drowning out one side, or anything like that?
I think that to me, when we're talking about this particular event of the riots that are happening and the protests that are happening and the people who are just honestly at the end of the day just fed up, I think that's when we start talking about the idea that that's how this is slowly turning into a movement.
Right.
You see a lot of individuals who have been put as that marginalization for the thing that's on the spotlight. I was actually having this conversation with my mom, which is very interesting. If we date back to how Americans protest since we became an America, the first step was, let's get us independence from Britain. So there is an American identified people that want their identity and they're willing to protest. And we have the Boston Tea Parties, we have the riots, we have literal wars happening. We want our sense of independence. It's gained, and that is a victory for America. After that, we start seeing a lot of other spotlights happen. We saw the inferences that we want to talk about with sexual health and what that means, and they had the entire Enlightenment area, that there was a lot of protests that happened with that. There's a civil rights movement. There is just the abolishment of slavery, which was its own protest, which is its own fight, which is its own war. Then you have the women's suffrage. You have women declaring their rights as individuals and to be seen. We have the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and having queer identified people say we're here and we deserve to be here. You have the foreign rights, which have constantly been a problem, but at the same time, there's always been something else going on at the time. None of these things kind of lived in a vacuum by itself. When we were gaining our rights as an America itself, there was also the natives that were the land that were being pushed out every second of every day. And so in that way, there's so many of those different communities that were, even regardless if they had a say so or not, they were literally told to sit down for this moment. And because we're looking back at history, we know those individuals had at least some point in the timeline where they could stand up and say, no, my time is now. But what's happening today, which is it's a great thing, it's a terrible thing, it's a very mortifying thing, but we're seeing that we're coming off of numerous allegations of women who have been abused and harassed and kind of just cornered, and knowing that the judicial system doesn't always work out in their favor. It very rarely works out in their favor, and the system itself just doesn't seem to have a clean solution for this, which we're still seeing literally to this day, that it's just happening back to back. Seeing that the like I was just saying recently, we're talking about what does it mean to be a trans-identified person with a bathroom, and the fact that there was so much attention put to trans individuals and just their right to use the bathroom just set the precedent of just like another boiling pot. And so you think of these individual like circumstances that created their own little small movements and protests, the idea of women's rights and not being grabbed in the genitals area and that being its own like protest. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell was its own protest. All of these things were leading up to a point where people were saying we have a voice and we're not going to sit in the back row and wait for our turn to kind of get the rights that we've deserved much earlier than this. Get to a point where you see this, and then for us to start seeing blatant murder, because at the end of the day we saw murder. And one of the huge historical moments in Chicago that I think, in my mind, when we look back at this point as history, we'll see that there was a turning point when Laquan McDonald, who was a Chicagoan and was killed in Chicago by the police. And it was not just there was that sense of that criminal scrambling, shady underdealings where cops were trying to cover their own bases and kind of get off without any sort of court hearing. There was going to be this much pressure on the police officers here in Chicago, but one of the turning points that happened there was that the police officers actually got a case. It wasn't even accused or convicted. They got an actual court hearing, saying that we will see this in court. We won't write this out outside of the court system. We're going to try and do our best we're going to try and put this in the judicial system so that we can at least have records put down that police officers are being noted that they're doing this. And for us, I would definitely say for myself in this household, we thought when we saw that situation with Laquan McDonald, we're like, this is a moment that we can actually maybe get progress. And that's such a feeble thing to think, and it's such a feeble thing to imagine, because you get so many other cases. Like I was saying, at that time we were still having Sandra Bland. We still don't have any justice for Trayvon Martin. There's so many different people that were on that list that you often get to the point where you're like, wait, is this the situation that happened in Florida, or is this the situation that happened in Tennessee? Is this the situation that happened in DC? Is this the situation that happened? And it just gets to be so many numbers. You're just like, I'm overwhelmed with how many people are on this list. But then to still have that sense of hope that it's just like, maybe the legal system can perhaps get it right this one time. And even then, there wasn't, even though the court hearings happened, the police officers, to my understanding, I don't know if there's been any updates recently, because this was last year that the protest was potentially happening. There were people that were lining up to do a peaceful protest, and then the case was accepted into trial. And then most of the people who were at the protest saying, we are willing to just disband. We still have our own rights of protesting in our own ways, but we're not going to march down Michigan Avenue, which is the main street in Chicago. And that sense of hope was something. And then we have this year where even when we have this huge pandemic and people are locked in their houses, the lives of African American males are still in danger. You would think if we're all kind of locked up, if only essential workers are out there, there's not a lot of from what we were understanding in like early March into a little bit of April. There was, I don't know about if it was happening over by you, but for us, it was just like, well, there's nobody out in the streets. So things like bank robberies are going to probably be at an all-time low. Ticketing is probably going to be at an all-time low. Like crime itself just seems like it's going to have this weird shift because there's nobody physically out in the streets. So if you hear about something, it's going to be huge because it's this one person. We would think that person would be really silly to try and rob a bank when there's nobody there. Right. So in that situation, we were just like, maybe this is the moment where we're going to start to see things at least plateau, and then to still see it happening. I think for that with the pandemic, with the fact that we're seeing all these other cases with every other identity that's happening, movement happens when everybody just reaches that boiling point and reaches that moment where they're like, I'm not going to take it anymore. What's happening now to me that kind of gives me that sense of anxiety internally is the fact that on top of all of these protests, on top of all of this anger, on top of this exhaustion, just seeing the system, the governmental system just not seem to be getting it right. With anyone, with any identity, with any case, with any circumstances, we lose faith in our own governmental structure. There's no sense of hope. If you have all of these different cases where everything was done wrong, and everyone is suffering from this level of injustice, where do we have that sense that we can trust in the police force, we can trust in the judicial force, we can trust in the prison industry? Because that's another thing, the idea that we just recently had marijuana in a lot of states considered to be legal, and so those individuals who are arrested just because they had marijuana, it's not a crime anymore. And that shift in understanding that what the country has done before is wrong, and what we're doing now needs to change that. And then there's those individuals just refusing to change. That's where the movement happens. That's where the need for that aggressive punch that we need to have this jostle in how we do things, because it's just not working. And I think for a lot of people to just realize it's just not working, and I'm tired of it not working, especially when there's been ample amount of times and people who have said, this is a system that works better than what you're doing now. Why can't we go this way? And that's when those discourse become huge, because we can have that conversation and that person can say, yeah, you're right, I completely understand it. Those petitioners, and I'm sure you've seen out on the street, to say, can you sign this? You can go ahead and sign it, and then you take it to the right people, and those people are going to review it and put a stamp on it and say, all right, we're going to push this forward. And then nothing happens. You slowly start to lose faith in that system. That discourse, it becomes less of a discourse, and it becomes rage, it becomes anger, it becomes people lashing out, it becomes people just having this disparity.
Is that what this, kind of everything we're seeing now is?
It's a bunch of.
Is that sort of where you see where it stems from? Is just this people finally, like, it seems like the straw that broke the camel's back has come, where like people are just, they're like that's it. Clearly nothing else has worked. We've been failed over and over again, and so it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? We're gonna if it's so broken that no matter anything we've tried before, it can't fix it. Are we gonna like break everything the rest of the way and start over? Is that like the sentiment, you think?
That's definitely been conversations that I've heard through a lot of different public speeches in reaction to this. There's a lot of people who, like you said, are just saying, at this point, with as much problems that we've been seeing, with all of the different backgrounds and things not working, I would rather just have this literal purge of it all. Just set it all, reset everything, shut down everything. Let's just start over. And even with how we're handling the pandemic itself, it just seems like people are just saying, all right, the system just isn't working. You're firing folks who are responsible for taking care of the situation, and nothing's getting solved. We're not in a great place. We're not in a terrible place. We're just constantly staying in the same place. Just reset it all. And myself personally, I don't know. That's one of the things that a lot of people have asked, and what I will say, that's a question I was afraid of answering today. Is that if asked, what do I think needs to happen now, which a lot of people have asked me, I genuinely don't know. I feel like, much like everyone is feeling, I do see that there's a sense in me that's just like, I'm exhausted with what we've been going through and how everything has been happening. It's just not working. It clearly hasn't worked. I don't know at this point. Not to judge anybody who has their own opinions about this, but I don't know anybody who's saying that like this country was fine before. This country has always been amazing. I've never seen it that way, and that's just because that I'm me navigating life as a black man. I've seen these reports. George Floyd is one of millions of people that I know personally, that I've heard of on the news, that I see in movies all the time. My understanding is that this country has always had a lot of flaws, a lot of problems, and you fix it, it will take so much work. It would take so many different things to change, and all those different identities would have to change. We have to address the fact that trans individuals have gotten, and I just want to publicly say it, trans-identified individuals have gotten one of the crappiest sticks in this circumstance, because you think about all the different details, just like emotionally. If I'm a trans-identified person and I need my hormone injections, I need doctor checkups, I need maybe my cases that I have, it's some sort of body modification that needs maintenance. I need to get to the hospital so I can do that maintenance. I need to have a job so I can keep affording these type of healthcare needs. I need a community of people. There's a lot of different places that were open before that I used to work for that created a safe space where you can just come in and just say, today's not a great day, or I'm going through a lot of stuff and I need somebody to kind of understand me, or people who have families that don't accept what they're going through, just being kicked out at a time like this. It is just a really hostile period for them, and to kind of imagine just me kind of like putting myself in those shoes and just understand that there's not a clean fix for that. The clean fix for that is to cure the pandemic, right? It's right. If I get rid of COVID-19, they can get back to work. We can start doing things of building back up spaces, but we can't do that until the disease is fixed. And we can't fix the disease until we have a right understanding of things. And the right understanding of things can happen until we all kind of cooperate together. But we can't all cooperate together unless everybody is heard. So it's a weird, vicious cycle that I don't know that there is one. It's definitely not one size fits all type of fix for it, but
sure,
it's definitely gonna have to be inventive. It's got to be something that we haven't seen before. It has to be a tactic that we haven't seen before. Kind of speaking to the folks who have protested and the people who are fighting and the people who are pushing back too. It's just kind of not to be diminishing of what's happening now and what happened in the past, but I just feel personally it's something we've seen so much. We've seen riots, we've seen protests. That this country has seen a lot of protests, and it's seen a lot of riots, and it's seen a lot of injustices. After a while, you just get to a point where it's like, this is getting kind of old. It's what's the next thing that we're looking for? What is the next step is beyond hitting the streets and screaming or busting in windows? What's the next thing that we can do to kind of have that sit down, sign petitions to get things done in paper? How do we get the institutional change in the government when we keep seeing this back and forth? Like, when we have a certain person in office, things move in a certain direction, but then as soon as we get somebody else in office, everything seems to retract. So this back and forth just gets tiring. It does get very, very tiring.
Right. I'm gonna take a sidestep out of our conversation for a second here to let you know, since we haven't been able to play this together, that I suck at this game.
Oh yeah,
the viewers have this far watched me play 45 minutes trying to clear stage 1. I'm fighting a cop with a shield right now, which is, I guess, apropos, of the conversation that we're having. I did have to switch off of Blaze to default white man, since he seems to be a little easier.
A little bit easier.
I was getting killed too much. But
are you in the?
I'm in like a precinct.
Oh, so you're past stage 1.
Oh yeah, no, I finally beat stage 1. I died like 4 or 5 times though. Had to switch to the first guy, and I was like, all right.
I died like 4 different times with that like light lady. She is rough. She is absolutely rough. These boss battles are out of control.
Hey everyone, Matt here, just breaking in for a couple of quick announcements. First, I want to thank you for listening. I hope that you have found the insights my friend Lip shared on issues facing minority groups from his perspective enlightening. I know I certainly did, and there's definitely plenty more of that in the second half of the episode here. I set out to make this series in the first place so that I could learn about my friends and their experiences and just who they are as people on a deeper level. And this conversation with Lip did so much more than that for me, and I hope it does for you as well. I did cut out a couple of minutes of our recording here as the shield guides made it very, very difficult to focus on the conversation, and things got a little incoherent as our attention was divided. So I'm going to drop you back in after we get back on track a little bit. But I wanted to use this as an opportunity to encourage you to take action. Opening a dialogue and listening are just the first steps of a very long process to fixing some of the issues that are facing us in this country. There are a few resources that I'm going to put up on the screen where you can make a donation to support the current movements for equality and justice that are taking place right now. If you can donate financially, great. If you can't, there are plenty of other ways that you can get involved. Write your representatives. Make sure to get out and vote. Vote for progressive candidates. Donate time. Research ways that you can get involved in your local community. And most importantly, reach out to your friends, your family, the people in your community. Listen to what they have to say. Listen to the things that are important to them, and do your part to make a difference. It is everyone's responsibility, and I hope that we can all come together and have a better future for everyone. So thank you for listening. Here's the rest of the episode. I hope you enjoy.
It always upsets me when I see people like take this view
I'm
of
not
like
really trying to be in this person, but I also want to like be able to give my 2 cents about something that
right. I'm
saying judge for it.
Right. I'm not part of the problem. So like,
Yeah.
what like at a certain point, when are you the part of the problem? I guess if you're not at least trying to.
And I think that,
step 1 is recognize and listen to other people, right?
Yes, and I think that's one of the things I like about this particular movement, that is making more gravity than anything else. More than anything, this movement to take action for George Floyd's life. There is that idea, like you're saying, if you are not directly a part of the solution, it's time to start thinking that you are a part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that for any of us, and I definitely put myself on that pedestal as well, there are places where I will speak about something that I don't know about. And my own understanding of it is limited to the fact that, like you said, I can't live outside of the life that I know. This is who I am, and this is who I know. I'm not going to be able to understand things in other people's eyes until I do the work of asking them and understanding where they're coming from. And then also at the same time, like, not asking one black person what is it like to be a part of this problem, and then walk around and tell everybody, well, I talked to this one black person, so that's how black people feel.
Dang it, that's what I was going to do after we had this conversation. I got to change my whole strategy now.
Get one of every type of person.
That's right. Yeah. Once I hit one of everybody, then I'll be good.
But I think, like, in that sense, like, that's been widely the way that people can kind of hide in their own isms. I could hold my own personal understanding of how I feel, and I'm going to use something really, really archaic to kind of disconnect for a second a lot of the hot button issues, so that people can understand what I mean by the hot button issues. If I am somebody who just really doesn't like broccoli, and there's a lot of people in the world that are just like, broccoli is good for you. There's a lot of great benefits. It tastes great with these seasonings, all the case. At the end of the day, I'm probably going to always be that person that just says, I don't like broccoli. And you can give me all of the benefits and all of the good stuff. You can even kind of tell me why I should like broccoli. And in a lot of cases, for my own personal health, it does me good to see benefit in broccoli. But at the end of the day, if I don't like broccoli, I don't like broccoli. And having a space where I can see that when I walk into communities of broccoli loving people, and know that this is the identity that I have, there's a sense of responsibility in that conversation to know that when I speak about things, I'm speaking saying, this is where I stand. This is something that I have set as a firm thing for myself. And I do also understand that in saying this, I'm seeing both sides of it. I'm seeing that side of the person who's saying that someone who does like broccoli. I'm seeing it from the side of somebody who doesn't like it. But I'm taking this stance because it's something that I believed in, and that may be right, that may be wrong, whatever the case may be. This is where I stand at it. I'm not going to let my hatred for broccoli kind of infect the rest of the conversation. But I'm also not going to try and group broccoli loving people into one nest, because there's so much more to a person than if they like broccoli or not. And I've used this analogy in such a weird way that jumping back into something that is a hot button issue, there is like things that people do have beliefs in, and one of the things that every side to every conversation has to understand that there are a number of reasons why anybody believes, has an idea of, is persuaded by any sort of opinion or idea, or in cases that we found recently, literal hard-driven facts. There are reasons why people see things that are written down on a piece of paper and say, I don't believe that. Or people that have their understanding about anything. And you don't know what that person has gone through that led them to the world of understanding that. I think moving past what this person said, this person thought, this is the actions that somebody felt was right or wrong, and getting more to the moral point of just saying, when we look at this movement as a whole, when we look at this country as a whole and this world as a whole, there's still shared spaces that we all have to take up. We have to inhabit this earth, except for the people who just got on a spaceship and went to space. They don't have to inhabit the earth anymore. But hopefully they're not bringing a lot of what the earth has left over. Dear God, it just hit me. I really hope that none of those astronauts have the coronavirus. That's the worst.
I gotta hope. I truly have to hope that they took the appropriate precautions to not send coronavirus into space.
Oh man, if I can wish for anything for the rest of the universe, I hope that we just keep our stuff here in this.
I had surgery last week. I had to get a surgery on my shoulder for an injury I've been having, and to get my surgery, I had to get a coronavirus test, a negative coronavirus test, and then from the time I had the test until my surgery, I was very strictly
You can only do-
told to self isolate. Like you can't. Like we know you don't have it, so now like we have to make sure you don't get it before we'll do surge on you. I have to hope that like
Yes.
NASA NASA has at least that level of
understanding of how
of like
Yeah.
precaution.
Dear God. But yeah, in that sense, we do all have to inhabit this space at the time being. And so with that, if we are not as a singular existence on one planet, not immediately contributing to the forward moving of life and the health and well-being of all of us as an individual race, and not even just us as a race, but just like the world in general, the literal Earth itself. There is ways that you can hold whatever opinions you have, hold whatever beliefs you have, and then still say, my thoughts and my opinions on this matter is what hinders the greater notion of things. I like to think of that in the game. I don't know if you ever played the game. Man, the title is just a weird use right now. Have you played the game Secret Hitler?
Maybe.
I will say this for anybody who is listening to this conversation and wondering where on earth I'm going with this conversation. The game itself is made by some of the same makers that make Cards Against Humanity, and they have some other games that just came out, Black Card Revoked. I think they have this other game called Tops and Bottoms. I don't quote me if that's them or not. But the company's goal is to kind of create very racy kind of topics in a humorous way, that you can have these kind of conversations. And the more I think about it, maybe it is more problematic situation how the game is set up. But nevertheless, this game Secret Hitler, the mechanics of it is a very interesting game mechanic in the sense that it's a game where if everyone in the party that's playing has to agree upon certain things to go well. So like they have two different options. Either it's like a red color like law. I think the game calls it like a law. It's a red color law or a blue colored law. And the majority of the party has to decide either it to be like passed as a law or denied as a law. And you don't know the color until all the voting has happened. And the problem with this is that you have people who are clearly out to be a part of the like snakes. If you ever played, this is probably a way better example, but like a Midnight Werewolf, you know that there's certain individuals who are werewolves and they're trying to survive. So of course they're going to disseminate the conversation by like having opposing opinions or confusing the conversation. But I think what's interesting about a conversation is that it forces you to play a role that you don't probably see yourself playing. When you look at the majority of conversations, the majority of discussions, I'm calling out a lot of people who use the internet because I feel like anybody who has ever used a Facebook and or a Twitter has had a passionate opinion that needed to go in a comment somewhere, and that comment has descended into a madhouse of just like wild chaos comments that have followed it. I'm starting to believe that we as a human race should never have been given the opportunity to leave anonymous comments. But in that sense, in your mind, when you are posting those things, when you have those comments, when you're saying those things, you very well, so there's a lot of truth to what you're typing in that moment. And that truth may wildly change the second you hit the send button. And we've seen that happen a lot. There's a lot of people who hit the send button and read it and was like, man, that should have stayed in my head. Or I could have probably worded 90% of that message way better. But it's a public forum, so a ton of people are going to hear it, and it's just going to cause more of this kind of like conversational chaos. I think that it's important when we have these discussions that you can start saying, before I hit the send button, before I send out this conversation, I can start framing that some things that I say, some things that I put out there, one, is going to be public. People are going to know that it's going to be out there, and I can start to take more responsibility of what I'm saying publicly. But then also, secondly, I can start posting knowing that, or start thinking about the things that I put out. Is it contributing to things, or is it taking away from things? If I can start thinking that way about the conversations that I have with people, one, I can know the effect of what I'm going to say and what I'm going to do and take responsibility of that because I'll know it before I do it. But then also, when things happen, you're not wildly shocked that people had opinions about what you had to say, because you know what I have to say is going to either support the forward moving of a conversation, or it's going to take away from the conversation. And I like games like that because, one, you're putting things in a very, very super hypothetical, which is something I like about like tabletop games, things that I like about board games, things I like about role playing. You are taking the context of what you feel, what you really are kind of sitting with in this world, and they're forcibly putting yourself in a character that is very different from you, very similar but adjacent to you, just different than you in some case in point. And in doing so, you hold opinions of these people. And if you're really truly playing like the role correctly, you are thinking about the truth that these people hold. One of the things I love about D&D is that the characters that I pick, I'm always going to pick somebody who pick a human. I never pick a human. And then I think about like, what does it mean to be anything else? An elf that lives thousands of years will have different opinions about what is right or wrong right now and what matters right now than somebody who only has 100 years to live. And that's assuming that that's like 100-year expectancy life, because I know D&D says like humans live to 100 years. Maybe not. Especially with the decisions that they make. It's lucky they make it to 25. But in that case, you're thinking about just that different ability, difference that you have in yourself. You can also think about it in just socio-political ways. I know that one of the things that, like I was saying before, I really like your style of DMing because you create very real, complex moments for people to role play out. And I think that it is a very delicate balance, one that I think that you may do better than me. We'll have to have some sort of weird DM off to see better, but you have these moments where you lean in moments where people want to do a little bit more scene work, as it were. I think because it seems like you and your brother definitely have theater background, so you guys have a lot more opportunities for like theatrics to happen, scene work to happen, dialogue and like drama to kind of build in the scene before you move forward. And I think that that's a very delicate balance because you have folks that are strong in your party. I think most of the folks in proficiency bonus all have like a strong ability to really dive into that character and really think of the character's unities as true. So like I may think, going back to the broccoli thing, I may think that I hate broccoli, but this character is going to be so in love with it, and they're going to think about what is they can't function without a world without broccoli, and then the DM gives them a circumstance where they just don't have it, and I have to think about not only what my opinions of it is, but I'm thinking about my opinions of it in that character who thinks very different than me. And I think that's a beautiful thing that can happen. And then I don't mean to like oversell roleplay, but I feel like that's something that is going to be a part of that next thing.
It's one of the reasons that I, that I love D&D, and especially the roleplay aspect of D&D. When you look at it from an angle of using it as a tool to breed, understanding of people who are other than you, and I know because I've definitely seen this. I know that there is definitely issues that exist in D&D and in the D&D culture specifically of all of the same things that exist anywhere else: gatekeeping, against women, underrepresentation of people of color, things like that. But on an individual level, like the choices that each individual person. My brother. So we this past Tuesday we canceled our live stream, and we just ran a blacked out image in solidarity with the Blackout Tuesday that was organized on social media, and my brother posted. I set up the thing that we put on the stream to just run the blackout logo. And I didn't know he was going to do this, but my brother posted something on Facebook on our show's channel just to put the announcement out there that we wouldn't be we wouldn't be streaming just so that people weren't coming to the stream and seeing the thing running and then not knowing what's going on, and then they're kind of sitting there. But he wrote, Tabletop Legends will not be streaming tonight in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. Just as we can mold our world and characters in D&D, we also have the power to create the world we wish to see away from the gaming table, and our own character when the dice are packed up. Let's all roll our initiative and fight for change together. And I didn't see that until after my gaming group we played privately on that Tuesday. We cut the stream, we got together, and we decided that what we were going to do is we were just going to play an off campaign game, just play together. It was a moment where putting noise out into the social media world was not important, and quietly just sort of being together was. Yeah. And so we played, and I was DMing, so I pretty much my focus is entirely on that. I'm not really able to be looking at other things, and I saw this post that he had made after we were done, and it was just such a beautiful sentiment that he made, and it reflects so much of why I love D&D and the role-playing communities that spring up around it, is that it is this amazing tool to create a world where you can control the character, the way that things are. You have the power to make the world the way that it should be, and it's it should be an empowering thing for people to to take to step away from the gaming table and sort of use the lessons that they learn there. And I know you said you use D&D as a learning tool, and I'm sure that's I definitely want to I have some stuff that we haven't hit on. I don't want to record for hours and hours, but I would I definitely want to kind of hit on some things that it's just this sort of incredible experience that you can get from D&D, of using it as a tool to practice empathy and everything that goes along with it. So the poor video viewers have been staring at the character select screen because I died a while ago, and I've just been sitting.
I died a while ago, and I definitely just paused because I was getting a little bit frustrating.
So we talked, and I think I knew that was going to be the natural progression of this conversation. To just really. I wanted to listen to the things that you had to say, and the experiences that you'd had, and the thoughts that you have had where it relates to issues of the history of this country and racial inequality and the struggles that different groups have and all that stuff. That was inevitably going to be where a lot of this conversation went, as that's how it should be, and that's how it needed to be, especially with everything going on, currently in our country. But I think one of the themes that we sort of have talked about here, and in keeping with the theme of this, I guess this show and what I'm trying to do here is, step one of progress towards making the world a better place where we can all kind of understand each other a little bit better is to talk to people and to learn about who they are as a person, and more than just one, whatever that one particular this is a gaming term. I almost said that one particular modifier that they have.
Yeah.
If you sort of strip that away and talk to the the person and learn about the person, I think that's a powerful place to start. So I definitely don't want to let this conversation end without kind of picking your brain and learning about sort of some of the other things in your life. I know you are, just from what I see on Facebook, you seem to be very heavily involved in your community. I know you're a writer. I guess, I just sort of want to, what does Lip's life look like? What are your what's your jam? What do you?
That is a beautiful, beautiful way of structuring that question, and I think subconsciously I purposefully to let you kind of decorate it more, because I genuinely think about how to answer it. It's huge because I do wear a lot of hats at a single time. For those who don't know me, one, it's probably likely that you already do, which is one notion about me. I'm very, very social, as much as I can be, because people are my thing. And wherever there are people, that's what I try and major at. That's what I try and find expertise at. So, yes, I'm definitely a writer. I'm more of a poet and playwright than anything else. I have written and published a novel, but don't ask me about it. It's a long story.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna ask you about it because I'm gonna force you to plug things at the end while you go to wrap up. But proceed. I won't interrupt you now.
That one it's a whole thing. I definitely do a lot of work. I've been changing my focus. Most recently, if you were asking right now, what is the number one thing that I do? I really have fallen in love with the idea of tabletop gaming. As you may have slowly seen, I'm kind of jumping into some new systems, seeing what's out there and seeing what play style really works for the type of storytelling that I'm used to that connects to my writing. But I've been using tabletop as a form of creating stories with folks and kind of annotating it. I found that when I was first a player in my first couple of tabletop games, I really fell into idea, like we talked about before, really kind of diving into this character. What are the minute things? Does this character like broccoli or not? Probably a real thing that I asked my character. But just like really doing this deep dive, and I find that as a playwright, it really helps because system of me being a writer for plays, I create a world on a stage where people only see a small lens of it, but there are other people, aka actors and directors and scenic designers, that take all the pieces of my script, kind of dissect it, and they run with the sections that are kind of geared for them, or even pieces that are not geared for them. They see it and they create their own corners of the world. So for me as a writer, I always felt that it's important for me to have as much of understanding of the world so that when I give them this piece, either I know exactly what kind of design choice or what type of character choice I'm giving the actors and the designers and the director, or I'm allowing enough opportunity, which is another thing that I love about D&D, is that I'm allowing enough opportunity for the collaborative process to thrive, so that I know what my story is, but I don't know what the temperature is in this play. But for somebody, that is wildly important to them, and they think that it has to be 90 degrees because that's going to create the catalyst of the story kind of unfurling. And I can look at that and say, you know what, yes, or I can look at it and say, maybe not, maybe it's like 75 because you gave a good point. So I took that and I started thinking about other things that I can do with tabletop gaming. I have recently also become an educator, a teaching artist in different locations. I teach theater classes to some schools through some theater companies within Chicago. And I've gotten together with some literacy programs in Chicago to kind of sit down and create these educational sessions for anybody who's never played tabletop before. It's essentially a space where I sit down, give children a set of dice, kind of have this very don't want to say dumbed down because it's not. It's still extremely complicated for even the most advanced player. Dungeons & Dragons has a lot of lore and a lot of rules. There's a ton of it. But I try to create a kind of cheat sheet that doesn't seem so overwhelming when you look at it.
Sure.
And connect it to the idea of, like you were saying, empathy teaching. So we're going to roll dice, and we're going to make attacks, and we're going to try and outsmart this like very clever barter situation so you get a discount, or stealthily sneak past this person, or like go to the one of my favorite things that happens in these sessions are those moments where you have these big political debates where you're trying to talk the king out of going into war. But it take these kind of larger than life kind of fantasy world decision making that the dice inevitably play a probability factor in, and then discussing how you react to the fact that like this is what I'm trying to do and this is what the dice tells me I do. So I love that idea because just in general with life teaching, you can set out and say, I wanted to tell this person how beautiful they were, but the words that come out of my mouth can either help, hurt, confuse, berate, scare, any number of these things, and I won't have control of that because I won't know how it's going to land until the dice has been cast. And that's something that's been huge in these kind of lessons with the students that I work with, is that let's really focus on the idea of you really specifying as much as you can, this is what I want to set out to do. And then when the dice rolls the way they do, let's play the reactor. So instead of me being the DM and saying, this is what the NPC does, this is what the NPC happens, open up that door and saying, all right, so this is what you're trying to do. With a natural one of what you're trying to do, what is some negative ramifications that can happen from this? And then in that interesting way, it teaches before going down that road. Another thing that I do as well is I worked at a lot of hospitals for social, a little bit of social work, but like specifically community development as far as adolescent mental health and adolescent sexual health. And so in talking about this, we learn about control demand schema, which is something that if anybody works in kind of like the social work kind of field, you would know that it's like the idea that I have opportunities to make a choice at any moment of my life, and I can kind of break down what that means at any moment. But this just kind of puts a game in front of them to not have it be this kind of wordy thing that some philosopher says, and says, this is a practical way of doing it that's not happening in life. It's a fictional life that I can create to have this moment happen, and then I can slowly kind of apply it to life as it is. That's been a huge proponent. And then using theater, which is another thing that I've kind of spent my whole entire life playing in musicals and dramas. If you ask me who my favorite artist is, I'll always say it's Mark McDonagh. He's a very dark man, an Irish guy who has some very bloody stories, but behind every story there's a really interesting story, and he believes in this story. But using all of those kind of applied methods to connect with people. And at the end of the day, with all of the things that I've listed of what I can do and what I have done, working at different theaters, doing these type of things, being an avid gamer, even though I'm terrible at this one. Um, all of this comes down to the point of like I like putting myself in the centerpiece of people. Where there's people is where I feel like I do the best at what I can do. So that could be having a conversation. That could be starting a new game and just kind of talking through a game with them. That could be collaborating with a play, collaborating with. I do some radio dramas as well, which if you haven't gotten to radio dramas, it is a amazing thing to do right in this moment. That we're all kind of locked in. Radio dramas are great. You may have to figure out how to do either some Foley work yourself or find amazing Foley artists, but you can make it happen. There's more than enough objects in the world for you to kind of teach yourself how to make sounds. But all of those things connect to the idea that human connection is important. And I think even through all of this stuff that's happening, human connection is vital. And if I can do anything to kind of push that, I know everybody has their own way of protesting. For me, my sense of protest is to connect with people, because that's something that we're not doing enough of. That story, all of these different backgrounds are not coming together and communicating in a way that we could in the most powerful way. And by gosh, if D&D is going to be the way to do it, then I would love to be the person that goes down in history as saying, I created a movement using Dungeons and Dragons and social change at the same time.
Cool.
But,
Now,
yeah.
so I guess what, like, all of this. Hang on. Let me pick a lane here before I go too broad of a direction. Sort of your creative endeavors. You said you're a poet. You said you've written a book. You write plays. Where does that stem from? Is that something that, like, you've always been, you just sort of always been kind of a creative type? Was that something that, like, was encouraged, when you were young by, like, like important figures in your life? Something where does the creative drive kind of start for you, if you look back on your life, that kind of brings you to where you are today, where you've got all these different kind of creative avenues that you're exploring?
I will definitely say that the hardest thing growing up for me, being in Chicago, there's a lot of busy and very broad personalities. My family itself are very, very strong personalities. And I would say now I'm probably another strong personality, but being a kid growing up, I was always bad with words. I was bad with communicating. And one of the things that gave me high anxiety was the idea of direct confrontational communication. So, like, teachers coming up to me and demanding that I, like, answer for myself or my actions in the moment was mortifying to me. If someone came up to me and asked me, like, to go to a dance or so, I would be frozen. I would not know how to react. And so I found that growing up, one of the easier ways for me to, and especially when it came to more of the strong stuff, like real strong emotions towards, like, liking somebody or loving someone, hating someone, being very angry, being feeling extremely sad about something. I didn't really know how to, like, express that very well unless it was on paper. There's a lot of times when I was a kid where either me and my mom would get into fights, or I had this big, huge situation happen with me and some of either my favorite teachers or my least favorite teachers. Crushes that I've had. Oh God, don't even get me started on crushes. That was a whole other weird thing. Not being able to talk to people that I'm pretty sure everybody has a semblance of that, but there were times where I felt like in my heart of hearts, it's something I need to be communicated, but I'm just not the person to open my mouth and say it. I'm just really bad at using my words to say it to somebody. And so I found comfort in the idea of being able to sit down, think out everything that you need to say. And I think there was a teacher somewhere in the history of that, maybe a kid, to kind of help me kind of organize my thoughts onto a piece of paper. And that structure of doing that, one, just it felt like there was a big burden off of my shoulders. Like I didn't have to worry about not saying the right thing, or not not saying what I really need to say in that moment. I had time, I had a moment of editing myself, I had a way of just like using the right word. And being a writer, I really fell in love with the idea that like there's a difference between the word like there's a difference between the word of sad and destroyed, and the power that the two of them can have, and the way that you can play with those two things to really get a specific point across, is something I just fell in love with. I fell in love with the fact that I could write something to somebody and say, instead of "I like you," I could write down on a sheet of paper saying, I cannot see myself enjoying a day without you in it. That has a very unique impact and a very unique lore that I can almost feel what I want to say there, and the personalities in there as well. So I fell in love with that, and I started playing around with it, and then issues got a little bigger than just my own personal emotions. Case in point, there was a lot of racial stuff that was happening when I was growing up, with me being at school and watching kind of students get arrested, very young students, people who were like 13, 14 years old, being arrested for things that was alleged something that they did, but me knowing that person and knowing the very specifics of that situation, I know that that person wasn't guilty of whatever they were being accused of. And understanding that that's something that having a relationship with like legal presence at a young age. And then also understanding that there's also people in the world that, regardless of how I feel about the actual legal system, there are just what we all navigate. There are good and bad people in our lives. And they may be police officers, they may be just regular people, they may be people that look like you, maybe people that don't look like you. Everybody's going to have an opinion that is either for you, against you, non-complacent of you in general. But in realizing that there's a bigger picture, I started writing poetry as a means of like trying to connect how I feel to how someone else would feel. For me, it was a lot easier when I connected it to my mom, because I lived with her, I was very close with her, and there was like almost a point where I felt like I understood her to a level where she didn't have to say things, and I didn't have to say things, we just got it. But then that emotion helped me understand that level of empathy that you were talking about, that I can start, I may not be able to see the world in your eyes, but I can take an attempt to step in your shoes and like walk, if not 5 minutes, then an hour or a day or a week in your shoes, and just see what that experience is like, because it won't hurt me none. I'll know my life. It can't possibly hurt me to know what you're going through. And so I'd start doing that more and more, and because I had my mom as like an imprint, and I will give her credit, she gave me a lot of open books to saying like, when she's feeling a certain way, because she was such a very strong presence and strong personality, when my mother's angry, everybody knows it. When my mom's happy, the world knows it. She's very expressive in that way, and it helped me understand like I can start looking at people like that and start looking at the cracks of people too, because just because you are singing to the highest note that you possibly can doesn't necessarily mean that you're happy. That really the real nuance in that is looking at that person and saying there's so much more to that story, and just because this person is saying I am fine, to me as a writer, the words "I am fine" is the most conflicted sentence in the English dictionary, because fine is so nebulous. There's no concreteness to that word, and when people use it, they mean something so extreme in that moment. And considering all of these other extreme circumstances, I am fine, which is a very powerful thing to say as well. And so I started looking into that and saying, like, how can I use this as a moment to really get to know this person, really get to know their story? And then I got into doing theater. when I started doing theater and being on stage, I really like the idea of just like empathy in person. I am reading lines, I'm reading words that somebody else feels, and I'm thinking as that person. But then I learned as a writer, I had a chance to submit a play that I wrote for a competition, and it actually won and got into a piece that was talking about self appearance and self understanding and how other people perceive you versus how you see yourself. And it was a high school kind of like really dramatic like teen. I'm pretty sure if I were to read it to you all now, it would basically be the premise of Twilight. But it had a lot of like weird symbolism in it. There were statues in it that were like of people, and the people were the statues, and they had like this synergistic. It was like creating referring back to D&D. It's like creating a, what are those called? The ice people that are copies of yourself. It's escaping me. Simulacrum. It's like creating a simulacrum on stage, and it was like I didn't know what a simulacrum was at the time, but that's what I was creating. But I noticed that the director was doing it, and in my head, I was thinking, he's doing it wrong. I didn't know why. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew when I was watching the direct, I was like, I could totally do that better because I wrote it, and so I became that kid that like wanted to write and direct and play and everything, and I just fell in love with the idea of directing a little bit more. And then that's when I started creating all of these other intersections and start working at schools and start working as a DM and start working as a mediator for different conversations in hospitals. I learned that sense of leadership and that sense of writing helps me to bridge a gap with other people who may not be able to communicate what they're saying or communicate what they're feeling. That level of empathy is powerful in conversation. Eventually, I just got over the fact that eventually you're going to have to say things to people. Shout out to Christy for me and her. There's moments where me and her were just like talking about different things, and she's like, sometimes when we talk on these Discord things, you like write a book in Discord, and sometimes I'm just like wondering like, if you had to choose Wendy's or Popeyes, which would you choose? And I would write a book as an answer. She's like, you could just say one or the other. So yeah, that is what I've learned. Communicating, especially playing D&D, you are forced to not have a script in front of you. So you're not writing it all. You're just doing it. You're just saying it. You're letting it out.
That's such a cool like journey though. And I you said a bunch of things that I super relate to. This idea of, in your case, it was writing and poetry and stuff. You said you had like having the extra time to find the right words. Instead of just like being able to directly communicate, and it made me think of, in my own life in high school, when I first started to get into like online MMOs and gaming with people online, and that idea of like having the extra second to like find the right word, it was something that resonated with me because it was something that I have always like felt about like gaming online. Having that keyboard between you and the other person gives you even if it's just that like extra few seconds to like let your brain form what it wants to say in the right way, and and find those right words and say something coherent without running the risk of tripping over yourself or getting mixed up in your what your message is, or trying to ramble, or all of these other things that I relate to having those issues as well when I was younger, just like not feeling confident in like being able to communicate with people directly, but having that that slight go-between, that slight in-between, whether for me it was games, or for you it might have been writing or poetry or whatever it was, like just helps you sort of find those words. And then as you get older, you talk about now that sort of like, it leads you to theater, and it leads you now to D&D, and it leads you to trying to jump over some sort of toxic chemicals without dying. It leads you to this, all of these different things where at the core of it, it's like it's all comes down to communication and empathy with fellow people, and you can see where like you've sort of developed all of these these skills over the years, where because it's crazy to me, you talk about struggling when you were young with being able to communicate with people and being able to talk, but like we've been recording for almost 2 hours now, and like you're incredibly articulate, and you clearly have like a very high level of emotional intelligence and like self-awareness and like intellectual introspection that it's so interesting to to hear somebody who can sit and have this conversation for 2 hours about these super complicated and deep issues in our country and in things that we we experience personally, and have them say like, yeah, I didn't know how to talk, couldn't talk to people when I was young. So it's just super interesting to hear you kind of talk about that journey, and sort of the things that you've found that have gotten you there, being D&D and gaming and stuff like that, and like it makes me realize like how similar a lot of my own experiences are in a way. And if that's not the damn point of this whole series, I don't know what is. So I think like that's really amazing to me. I think
it's a good, nice tie around too. A very nice tie around.
It all wraps up with a nice bow in the end.
He would say, I will definitely say, life definitely doesn't work that way. It just happened to work with this conversation. It did go around very, very beautifully. If this opens up more conversations later, I'm more than willing to happen. I think, like you've learned through the conversation that we've had, one, I really appreciate this, and two, I am always for it. I'm always, and when you first asked me, I was just like, I am 100%, I'm 1000% in for this, because this is exactly the center point of what I do. To your point, too, for anybody who's listening.
Hey everybody, Matt here. Just a quick note to interrupt things. Right as Lip started talking here, there was a noise outside or something that set one of my dogs off barking and being very disruptive to the delightful conversation that we were trying to have. So I did cut out about 45 seconds of Lip trying to soldier on through my dog barking in the background. But once I finally settled her down, I just asked him if he would kind of repeat what he had just said. So you didn't miss anything. I just wanted to make a note here because the cut is a little jarring. Basically, Lip picks up right after this with exactly what he had said the first time around when my poor dog interrupted him. Okay, here it is.
Yeah, to anybody who feels like the story that I've told is unmatching to the type of persons you heard talk about this story, I will say, as much as it's unrealistic, it's very possible for you to get to a point where when I was a kid, I could barely form a thought in front of people, and it was very, very nerve-wracking. And to this day, it still is there, but it's possible for you to get to that point, and it does take a lot of work, but it also takes a lot of patience. But especially in times like now, there's a lot of people who are demanding you to speak up and say something now. And that's not everybody's story. But I will say, if that's something that you're trying to work towards and you're trying to get to that point where you can actually stand up and say what you need to say, or if you need to be that person that always writes it down, find your thing. Like we were talking about this whole time. Your thing is out there. If it's gaming, if it's talking, if it's public speaking, if it's public writing, if it's whatever. If you're a mathematician in the world and you answer your language is math, let it be that, and it's out there for you.
Great. Well, I think we've basically solved the world's issues at this point. I think we did it.
We're good.
Congratulations to us. We're heroes. And but no, I mean this has been great. We've been going for about 2 hours here, so I think that's a great place, and I think we've you can't get a better wrap up than the nice bow we kind of put in everything there. So thank you so much for taking the time to kind of sit and talk with me and give me the opportunity to kind of hear about you and hear about your your experiences. And I feel like I know Lip a little bit better, and that's sort of the point. And hopefully, if anybody ever listens to this, which who knows, I'm sure nobody ever will, but
you never know. You never know.
If anybody listens to this, I hope that the thing that gets that is the takeaway is that I think we take for granted our relationships with the people that we know, and I think just taking an opportunity to sit down and really listen to somebody is can be a great thing, especially in a time where I think a lot of us are feeling isolated and feeling alone. Just something as simple as reaching out and having a conversation can be extremely powerful. And I think celebrities and movie stars and famous people and politicians are not the only ones with with an interesting story that's worth putting out into the world for people to listen to. I think I firmly believe that every single person has lived a life that is unique and is interesting and is worth learning about and absorbing in order that we can all make ourselves a little bit better people by just learning who other people are. And I think we'll find as I did and as Lip did that even though we have we've grown up on different sides of the country. As we said, I am the default white man character from every video game. And Lip is a queer identifying person of color. From
the DLC content.
Yeah, that's right. But two people from as different walks of life as can be, but we have so much similarity in the things that are important to us, the things that we get joy out of, the things that we have sort of struggled with internally, and the ways that we have found to overcome them. So I think that's that I could not have hoped that the opportunity to sit down and record something like this would on the first shot would have been so personally valuable for me, regardless of if I edit this and put it up on YouTube and 3 people watch it. For me it was an amazing. This was a great experience. So thank you for hanging out with me, Lip. Thank you anybody who is listening in the future for sticking with us through this, and I hope you had a good time with us for the last couple of hours, and hopefully I will see you next time if things work out on another episode of Getting to Know You.